Today we're going to be talking about how trying to reassure yourself with exaggerated optimism is a form of intolerance of uncertainty, and how this can make your anxiety and worry so much worse. Hi everyone. In today's video, we're going to be continuing our series on manifestations of intolerance of uncertainty. And today's video is going to address a bit of an unusual form of intolerance of uncertainty. And it relates to reassuring yourself with exaggerated optimism, or by always trying to explain everything away rationally. Essentially, this takes a hyper-rational or hyper-optimistic view of the world and dismisses the prospect of anything negative happening. But before I get into that, just a couple of disclaimers to go over. I'm a registered psychologist in the province of British Columbia, Canada, and this video is for informational purposes only. It is not intended as a substitute or replacement for advice from your doctor or mental health professional. Now, with those things out of the way, let's start talking about exaggerated optimism. Now, I'll be honest with you, I tend to be a very optimistic person. I tend to view the world in a generally positive way, and I tend to think that things generally work out the way they're supposed to. Now, this isn't always the case. I acknowledge that bad things can happen. But I also see lots of opportunity for positive and hopeful things in the world. So I don't think of optimism as a bad thing. And most people wouldn't consider optimism as an example of intolerance of uncertainty. But it can be. And there are ways in which people can use optimism to try and eliminate the uncertainty in their lives, even though it's not actually true. I've done a number of videos on the concept of intolerance of uncertainty and how intolerance of uncertainty tends to drive excessive, difficult to control worry. And as a review, intolerance of uncertainty causes a person to focus on all of the potential negative outcomes in a situation, and therefore makes the person feel much more anxious and worried about what might happen. So, how do optimism and intolerance of uncertainty relate to one another? Well, sometimes when faced with an uncertain situation or an uncertain life event, people who worry a lot can become extremely anxious and cope with that anxiety by reassuring themselves with exaggerated optimism. So, for example, suppose I go in for a medical checkup, and my doctor notices a concerning mole on my arm. My doctor is concerned enough that he wants me to see a dermatologist to get this checked out. Now, obviously, this would be understandably alarming for a lot of people. I might start to worry about what this means. Is this something serious? What if this is cancer? What if it's spread? What if I'm going to get seriously sick? What if I'm going to die? It's easy to think about the what if questions and how the what if questions can spiral down the rabbit hole based on the uncertainty of what this mole means. Now, this is where exaggerated optimism can come in as a form of intolerance of uncertainty. In this situation, I'm feeling really anxious and worried because I don't know what the mole represents. But rather than accepting the uncertainty of the situation and having a wait-and-see approach, the intolerance of uncertainty fuels me to want to come up with a certain explanation or a certain solution to what's going on in this situation. And so what can sometimes happen is that people view a situation like this with exaggerated and unrealistic optimism. It's going to be fine. It's nothing serious. It's no big deal. My doctor is just being overly alarmist. Essentially, what I'm doing is creating a sense of certainty by telling myself there's nothing wrong here, that there's no problems, that the mole isn't cancerous, and that the rational explanation for what's going on here is that my doctor is just a bit of a hypochondriac. And in doing so, I eliminate, at least in my head, any uncertainty in the situation. I don't have anything to worry about because I've told myself that everything is perfectly fine. Now, you might be wondering if this type of approach works, if I can just tell myself that everything is fine and it will help take away my anxiety, what's the problem with that? Well, the problem is you know that you're approaching the situation with exaggerated optimism. In the example we're talking about, the only basis I have for saying that everything is fine is just me saying that everything is fine. I know there's no evidence to support this, and that this is just me telling myself it's going to be fine and that there's nothing wrong. So, even though the exaggerated optimism is designed to give me a sense of certainty, albeit false certainty in the situation, I know that it's a false certainty, and therefore I know the situation still could be bad. Ironically, the fact that I'm telling myself that everything is perfectly fine is almost like a signal to me that everything isn't perfectly fine. If everything was perfectly fine, then I know that I wouldn't have to be creating this exaggerated optimistic world in which I have imaginal certainty that the mole isn't cancerous. It's almost like when a child's going in for an immunization shot and the parent, with all good intentions, repeatedly tells the child, everything's going to be okay, there's nothing to worry about, it won't be bad, it won't hurt. Saying those types of things actually makes the child more anxious and more fearful of what's going to happen. Because if it wasn't that big of a deal, their parent wouldn't be making such a big deal about telling them that it's not a big deal. And so that's similar to how this exaggerated optimism actually fuels worry and anxiety. Because the person who's engaging in the exaggerated optimism, they know rationally that there's a limited basis for it. No matter how much I tell myself that the mole isn't a big deal and that I'm certain there's nothing wrong, I know that's not true. I don't know that there's nothing wrong. And so that leads us to question, how exactly should we deal with this exaggerated optimism manifestation of intolerance of uncertainty? And you do it by allowing yourself to be optimistic, but also to be honest and accurate with yourself about what you're actually telling yourself. So rather than telling myself, everything's fine, I'm 100% certain it's not cancerous, my doctor's just being a hypochondriac, it's much more effective for me to say something like, I'm hopeful it's not cancerous. I don't have a history of cancer in my family. And my doctor's always been quite thorough and diligent. But the mole is still concerning, and it's important to get it checked out. This is a much more realistic and honest way of thinking about the situation. And doing so in a way that doesn't exacerbate or magnify the amount of worry or anxiety I might be feeling in a situation like that. So the goal here isn't to tell yourself that you're certain everything is going to be okay, but the goal is more to tell yourself that you're hopeful everything is going to be okay, and that you just have to wait and see for whatever the test results are going to bring, and then to deal with it then. So I hope that gives you a bit of a better understanding of this somewhat unusual manifestation of intolerance of uncertainty. A lot of times when I'm talking about this as an example of intolerance of uncertainty, a lot of my clients will tell me that they can't relate to this at all, as their worries and what they focus on is primarily the negative. But sometimes, when people start to pay attention to how they respond to anxiety-provoking situations, they recognize that this tendency to fall back on exaggerated optimism or trying to explain everything away rationally, which is just an attempt, at its core, to create a false sense of certainty in an uncertain situation. So I hope that's helpful. I hope that gives you a bit of a better understanding. I'd love to hear any comments or thoughts that you have about this, so please leave me some comments in the comments section down below. If you've been enjoying my videos and would like to see more, please hit that subscribe button and notification bell, and you'll be alerted every week when I post a new video. So that's all for today's video. As always, thank you for making it all the way to the end of this video, and I will see you in the next one.